Sometimes the content is just too good to leave on the cutting room floor. Welcome to the No Password Required Bonus Content Edition.
You talk about your first retirement in 1996. What were you doing in the mid-90s sort of leading up to that first retirement?
Well, the Navy career was incredibly exciting. I had a tour in the Persian Gulf in a little island called Bahrain. There was a force there called Commander Middle East Force. It was a flagship, and then destroyers rotated in and out over time. If you'll recall, after World War II, the British made a decision to move everything east of Suez back. And if you look at naval history, because of the Industrial Revolution and what the British were able to do with naval ships, a significant portion of the world was a British lake. If you think about the British Navy and where it took the British Empire, South Africa was British, Tanzania, Kenya, Sudan, Egypt. In those days, what we currently call Israel, Palestinians, Saudi, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, what we now call Bangladesh, Burma, Malaysia, all the way down to Singapore, all the way even around to include Hawaii. And so when the British pulled out, the Navy, the U.S. Navy, wanted to have a presence, so we created Middle East Force. And so I was assigned to that force as a Navy lieutenant. And we mostly showed the flag. We visited Sri Lanka and Pakistan and Saudi and Kenya and Sudan and Jordan and so on. And so it gave me an appreciation for the region and the culture and the history. And so that was just a point in time. From that, I was assigned to a intelligence support operation in Rota, Spain, where our mission was to take care of the Sixth Fleet. So we became expert in not only Soviet submarine operations, but Soviet anti-carrier operations. And that was a great learning experience. We were housed in an NSA signals intelligence station located in Rota. And we were monitoring all source information, signal intelligence, overhead photography, electronic intelligence, human intelligence, photography, anything, to be able to stay ahead of what the Soviets were doing and how they might hold carriers or other assets at risk. And so Mideast forward for a couple of years, then 3 years in Spain, then back to the Pentagon. And I got to be in a special group doing some in-depth analysis. And then from there, I was assigned to Hawaii, to the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, where we ran similar operations against the Soviet Navy, the SSBN force, the ballistic missile carrying ships, also the Soviet forces in the Pacific, down in the South China Sea and over the Indian Ocean. And from there, I was assigned as the intelligence officer for the Seventh Fleet. If you understand Navy, the numbered fleets are the fighting force. Six fleets in the Mediterranean. Second Fleet in those days was U.S. East Coast. Third Fleet, the U.S. West Coast, and Seventh Fleet went from Hawaii all the way to Africa. So huge operating area, and we interacted with the Soviets quite a bit. So from there, War College, I was the executive assistant to the director of naval intelligence for a year, and then reassigned back to Hawaii as the intelligence officer for the Pacific Fleet. When I was there the first time, I was an analyst running an analytical corps. When I went back, I was the senior intelligence officer for the Pacific Fleet. And fortunately for me, we were very successful in our counter submarine operations. And the commander of the Pacific Fleet sat on the flag selection board of all things. And lo and behold, miracle of miracles, he selected me for Rear Admiral. And then he was reassigned to the Joint Staff as the vice chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he recommended General Colin Powell that take a look at this kid, McConnell. And I was brand new. I'd been selected for flag, but I hadn't put it on yet. And General Powell interviewed about 5 or 6 of us. And for whatever reason, he chose me. So I reported for duty. And 5 days later, the Iraqis invaded Kuwait.
Oh, my goodness.
So all of a sudden, I'm in a ground war. I knew a lot about submarines. I didn't know anything about ground war. And so I found myself in the Oval Office and up at Camp David and down at MacDill as the briefer for what was going on. So it was a pretty challenging time. When it started, I didn't know a battalion from a brigade, so it was a fast learning experience. So anyway, we went through the Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and we accomplished what we were after. And I'd been briefing the Secretary of Defense on a regular basis. And what I realized was Army guys are challenged to speak English. If the Secretary said, how many troops in the Republican Guard division, they would say 3 maneuver brigades. But that didn't mean anything to Secretary of Defense because he didn't have a military background either. So
how many people? Yes.
Yeah,
how many human beings is that? Yeah.
He would ask the question, and the Army guy would say 3 maneuver brigades, and I'd lean over him and say, sir, that's 11,000 troops in that particular division. And he just liked the way I was speaking English, because what I would do, and I'd see him on TV at night, and he was briefing the public with what I was telling him, not what the Army guys were telling him. So anyway, long story short, we moved the equivalent of Richmond, Virginia, from the United States to the Saudi desert, every building, stoplight, stop sign, everything. And then we did Desert Storm, and it was 40 days. We completely destroyed the Iraqi military and pushed the Iraqis out of Kuwait, which was the mission. There's some interesting stories there. I won't go into them now. But the secretary, when it came time to pick a new director of the National Security Agency, said, what about McConnell? And his staff said, oh, sir, you can't do that. He said, why? He said, well, he's a 1-star. As a matter of fact, he's brand new. He's only been a 1-star for 9 months. And he said, well, you telling me I can't send him to NSA? And they said, no, sir, he's a 1-star. It's a 3-star billet. He said, okay. And the next thing I know, General Powell and the Secretary of Defense were pinning 3 stars on my shoulder. And with the National Security Agency. So I don't know if I was the youngest. I think I might have been. My background in the academic world was soft science. I was an economics major. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting in one of the most technical agencies in the federal government. And if you'll remember, when I went in May of 1992, the Cold War was over. The Soviet Union collapsed in August of 1991. And so the attitude in the nation was peace dividend. And what that means, peace dividend, is we want the money back. We don't need you guys anymore. So we had a global operation that had been designed to surround the Soviet Union from the Arctic to the Indian Ocean, and from Germany to Japan, looking into denied territory. And the consensus was, we had a new administration, the Clinton administration had been elected, and we're going to have a different agenda, and we're not going to put as much effort and resources into the intelligence community that we once did. So what the dilemma I had was, well, how do we, this code breaking thing, the NSA does, pretty important. If you believe what Winston Churchill said after World War II, is code breaking saved 10 to 12 million lives and shortened the war by as much as 2 years. Remember, we were breaking Nazi Germany code during World War II and reading the German field commanders' orders before they did. And between the U.S. Army and U.S. Navy, we were breaking Japanese code. And so we turned the battle in the Pacific by defeating a Japanese armada at the Battle of Midway. much larger and more capable than the U.S., but we surprised them. So code breaking was pretty important. So I know that history, and I'm saying, well, sooner or later we're going to need this stuff. So we need to think about how we're going to do it. So what we started to focus on was exploitation of networks. If you remember, the internet was exploding about this time, and everybody was adopting that technology. And so for me was, how would you do this in the sense of intelligence? And so what we found is if you attack the network, getting the intelligence was very easy. Well, most people don't appreciate NSA has two missions, not one. It's not only code breaking, it's also code making. So if we want to prevent an adversary from reading our communications, we have to be the best in the world at code making. And as I thought about this, it changed my whole life because what I started to understand is cybersecurity is a strategic issue for the United States, and particularly with businesses, finance, transportation, and energy, and everybody quickly adapting this new technology without any regard for security. So I sort of started a one-man campaign to go brief the president, the vice president, and the senators and Congress members on the House side, and Secretary of Defense and the Director of Central Intelligence said, "Hey, this is really important. We've got to improve our posture." Most of them said, "What? What are you talking about?" And I had a lot of difficulty communicating. Well, I was a 3-star, and the Navy doesn't have any in those times didn't have any 3-star intel billets. So I had nowhere to go. So my time ran out. So I retired at just under 30 years. And when I was making my plea for improved cybersecurity, one of the consulting firms had a member on the Defense Science Board, and I briefed the Defense Science Board. And he said, this kid's, he's got something here that may be a real payoff. So I was invited to join a privately held consulting firm as a partner. And my mission was to build a cybersecurity consulting practice. And the firm I was in had a commercial entity, global, and a U.S. government-focused entity. So they sent me initially to do commercial. And I found the leadership of the commercial world was pretty much like the leadership on the government side when I was trying to make my case in the early 90s. When you say security, what they hear is weight and time and burden and cost.
Yeah.
Security is a cost center, not a profit center. So the commercial sector was not interested. So the leadership, the people I was working for, said, "All right, this will probably come to fruition at some time. But for now, why don't you focus on the government sector?" So we focused on Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, NSA, CIA, whatever. And they were the primary targets of the U.S. adversaries. So we took a small business and built it into a large business over the course of the years I was there. We started at about $10 million in annual revenue. And when I retired in 2014, it was over $1 billion in annual revenue doing cybersecurity consulting and cybersecurity practices and support for the U.S. government. So again, life changes on a small event, and I just happened to get picked to be the new director of the National Security Agency at a time when cybersecurity became so much of an issue and so important. And by going to the consulting company, I was able to learn more and be more relevant to the debate and dialogue. So that's what happened to me. Is my Navy career, Joint Staff Intelligence Officer, General Powell during the first Gulf War, and then as a result of that, NSA, and then that's how I got into cybersecurity.
Thank you for listening to the No Password Required podcast, bonus content edition. To learn more about the show, visit cyberflorida.org/pod.